Welcome to the 216th episode of the Jami Dulaney Plant-Based Wellness Podcast. My name is Jami Dulaney, and I'm your host. I'm a plant-based cardiologist and endurance athlete living in Southwest Florida. Today it feels like 105 degrees outside. It's hot and humid here in Florida. I hope you all had a happy 4th of July. I hope you had a healthy nutrition, energy, exercise, fun-filled 4th of July. I went to a cookout and friend made the pulled pork for us, as well as a kale salad. She also made butternut squash with kale and pasta. We had carrot cake balls for dessert and fruit. I brought carrot dogs in a blanket. I used the pizza crust recipe from our cookbook and the carrot dog recipe from the cookbook, and made little pigs in the blanket. If you've ever had those as a kid, where hot dogs were stuffed in I think it was the Poppin' Fresh dough. Well, I used my own dough and the carrot dogs that were marinated, and so that was a really good hors d'oeuvre. We dipped them in mustard. So we had a great time. We ran 7 miles yesterday as part of the usual training for Ironman. Is coming up at end of September, so it's swim, bike, run, and adding a little weight training in there as always. During the week I use Zwift. I'm not sponsored by them, but I do use the Zwift program on a Wahoo trainer to do a little hill work, since we live in flat Florida, and the weekend we ride flat and windy. So that's pretty much the training that's going on. We're still in the height of mango season, so it's been great tasting a bunch of different varieties. This weekend I'm going to a mango tasting picnic, I guess, or picnic demonstration. Matthew Reese from What's Ripening in Florida is having a mango tasting get together, so that's exciting to taste new varieties and to harvest some of the embryos from the pit of the mango, so you can start your own trees. If you find a mango that you like and you open that pit up, the embryos there, and you can actually start a little mango tree by putting that embryo in a paper towel and putting it in a baggie and letting it sprout. So if you want to plant a mango tree, that's the way to do it. It takes a little longer to get fruit that way than if you buy a tree that's been grafted onto rootstock, but nevertheless, eventually you can get mangoes. The 4th of July picnic that I attended was not all plant-based. There was about half the people were not plant-based, and when I brought those little pigs in a blanket, one of the non-plant-based people tasted them and said, that's not too bad. It is. It's better than the hot dog I had earlier. I really mean it. And which was kind of funny. I did not mention the carcinogens associated with the hot dog that she'd had earlier. But it's always fun to see the shock on people's face that something plant-based can, actually taste good. I don't have any temptations of not eating plant-based, and I did not feel, I'm not having traditional 4th of July barbecue like other people. It's because I'm committed to being plant-based, and I'm very comfortable eating that way, and I feel great eating this way. I hear people say, a lot of times that it's the people that they're around that cause them not to be able to eat plant-based. And, or there weren't any choices, or, the various usual excuses. But I'm learning more and more that those people that complain the most about other people's choices and what other people are doing have not actually committed themselves actually eating healthy. And so they're really not, if you think about starting something new, there are those people that are anxious to try new things. So, we call them early adopters. And then there's this group of the majority of people that kind of sit back and wait to see if it's going to work or not. and then there's the late adopters. Well, I think, I'm coming to the conclusion that people that, are complaining about being around other people, there's just a little bit of them that would like to be an early adopter, but for the most part, they're not comfortable doing things that other people are not doing. So it's very hard for them to adopt a new behavior without the support of a large group of people, or it even being the norm. And, I think that's okay. You just have to recognize that. And I think if you're in that category, that you just can't quite make it all the way to being plant-based, because there's just a little bit of you that still feels that you're missing out, or you're tempted by other people. I think you just have to meet yourself where you are, and don't blame other people, because it's actually your decision to adopt a behavior, not other people's. You can't really blame other people for them not adopting the behavior. So, it's a choice that you get to make, and then once you make it, you actually can commit to the behavior, and you find that you actually enjoy it. There are also more and more evidence looking at the gut microbiome and people's ability to lose weight, diabetes, calorie extraction, cravings, and there was a study done that was published in Nature magazine this week that looked at pre-diabetics, and they actually gave them pasteurized gut bacteria that was Akkermansia muciniphila. And this particular bacteria is more prevalent in people that are thinner and leaner, and that eat a lot of fiber. But when they gave the pre-diabetics this particular supplement, it didn't change their microbiome when they tested it. So it's not like the Akkermansia actually colonated their gut microbiome, but it was probably some metabolite of that digestion. But the people were able to lose weight, their cholesterol went down, and they followed them for about 3 months. It just goes to show you what, and it's also been shown, this Akkermansia muciniphila, to increase in prevalence after a gastric bypass. But then it goes back to the regular microbiome of the person before the gastric bypass if they continue to eat the same standard American high-fat diet, probably low-fiber diet. So again, it's a lot more evidence that you can change your gut microbiome, your flora, and it can actually help you lose weight, decrease your cholesterol. But you're also most likely eating a much better diet with high fiber and mainly plant food. There was also another study that looked, it was called the obesity paradox. And traditionally, if someone is thin and has a heart attack, their outcome actually could be worse than if someone was overweight with a heart attack. But if you looked at if you looked at type 1 diabetics who were overweight, who developed cardiovascular disease, their increased risk of death or heart failure actually increased when their body mass index was elevated. And so they looked at 26,000 adults with type 1 diabetes over 14 years. And again, there was a prevalence with, having an elevated BMI as well as type 1 diabetes. When we look at type 1 diabetes, the complications of cardiovascular disease are markedly increased, as well as vascular disease. If you add being overweight, we know that adipose tissue or fat tissue is metabolically active, so it also produces inflammatory factors and tumor necrosis factors and platelet aggregation factors and clotting factors. So that's going to only make it worse. So again, by adopting a plant-based diet, even if you're type 1 diabetic, it still can have a lot of benefits. And we have that in our practice, that our type 1 diabetics achieve a much improved hemoglobin A1C, and they're not subjecting themselves to the accelerated rate of complications from vascular disease. If you eat plants, you generate the nitric oxide containing plants, kale, Swiss chard, broccoli, spinach, so forth. Cabbage, you make nitric oxide, you dilate your blood vessels, you help with scavenging and decreasing plaques, so that's a benefit in diabetics, type 1 diabetics, as well as adult onset diabetics and people with vascular disease of any cause. So being lean, a type 1 diabetic, is actually very protective. A type 1 diabetic is also less likely to have high cholesterol if they're eating a plant-based diet, decreased risk of cancer from eating the fibers. So, a type 1 diabetic gets all the benefits of eating a plant-based that anybody else gets, and it's probably even more protective or more beneficial because they're at such an elevated risk for these complications from the get-go. Our type 1 diabetics, they eat oatmeal and fruit and don't. Most of them have the lowest need for insulin that they ever have in their life compared to before they were plant-based, because again, their metabolism is so much improved, and they're able to absorb the carbohydrates and the fiber that's associated with eating a plant-based diet. It really gives them a lot of benefits. There was also a recent study looking at people with white coat hypertension. We used to say that, your blood pressure is just up because you're nervous about going to the doctor, or the stress of being in a doctor's office causes it, and it's not that big a deal, and you can just, perhaps you should do ambulatory blood pressure monitoring to see if it's really elevated at the doctor's office, or it's okay most of the time. What we see is that people that have white coat hypertension or hypertension associated with stressful situations have a much bigger sympathetic response to those kind of stresses, and probably live on the sympathetic or the fight or flight autonomic nervous system pathway more so than the parasympathetic nervous system pathway. And when you're living at a high sympathetic tone, it increases your heart rate and increases your blood pressure at baseline. And over time, this has actually been shown to increase cardiovascular complications such as heart failure and thickening of the heart muscle and so forth. So traditional medicine, with all of these studies that I've looked at, would suggest give people a pill to help them lose weight, give them a probiotic to change their gut flora, give them a medication to decrease their blood pressure. But I would like to talk about alternative ways, about challenging the traditional medical care system when we're just throwing pills at things, and look at the root cause. If we have an increased sympathetic tone driving the blood pressure, then why not address why there's an increased sympathetic tone? Over the past couple of weeks, I've made mention of breathing. We had Patrick McGowan a couple weeks ago on the podcast talking about breathing and sleep apnea. But breathing also has effective breathing is a way to decrease sympathetic tone and actually provide more gears between being in a very calm parasympathetic state to a very accelerated sympathetic state. And besides, so effective breathing and not just taking a big deep breath and blowing it off, that's really not going to change things, but effective breathing from the diaphragm, using the ribs, slowing the breath down, so a slow, effective breath. Most people hyperventilate most of the time, take way too many breaths in a minute. So by lowering the number of breaths, you can actually start to decrease sympathetic tone and get into a more parasympathetic tone. In addition, you can look at something that's called heart rate variability. And everything goes together, and basically these are all ways to evaluate the autonomic nervous system and become more in touch with the autonomic nervous system. Like I've said before, and I want to keep kind of expanding on this a little bit week by week, but the autonomic nervous system sits in the brainstem. And when we say autonomic, it means, for the most part, automatic, and we've lost touch with that response. So it just kind of occurs for us, and we don't really have much control or awareness or mindfulness of it. Our thinking brain is somewhat disconnected from our autonomic nervous system as far as ability to control that. But it wasn't always that way, and it's not that way in a lot of people. And people that are very attuned to their breath and breathing can actually control or start to have input with their autonomic nervous system. So to go back, looking at, so the autonomic nervous system is made up of two major branches for the most part. The sympathetic nervous system, fight or flight, increased blood pressure, increased inflammation, increased heart rate, and the parasympathetic nervous system, digestion, calmness, healing, anti-inflammatory, lower heart rate, lower blood pressure. The vagus nerve is associated with the parasympathetic nervous system, which is also responsible for our contraction of our diaphragm. So the way you breathe affects your vagus nerve output, which is connected to your brainstem and your autonomic nervous system. So you can imagine if you get really excited and you start breathing really fast, that's going to inhibit your vagus nerves, vagal tone, and increase your sympathetic tone. And so again, heart rate, blood pressure goes up, but slow, easy breathing at a decreased rate is going to increase the vagal tone, increase parasympathetic, and slow things way down. And if you apply that to blood pressure, you can actually affect blood pressure that way. So if you take diet with plant-based nutrition and nitric oxide producing vegetables that dilate the blood vessels, and you add into that breath training where people slow their breaths down, take a more effective breath with breathing from the diaphragm, then the blood pressure actually goes down, and you have a great means for lowering blood pressure, lowering response to stress. A lot of people get very stressed out, and it's like, well, their blood pressure goes up when they're stressed. It is almost impossible to eliminate stress from your life. I don't think anybody really wants to eliminate stress from your life, and it actually is good. It's more of how we react to the stress as opposed to the stress itself. And we all have the ability to react to stress in a positive way. It's certainly easier to sit here and say that when I'm in a calm environment, but by the way we breathe and the way we're mindful in the period of time that we're stressed, you can also control the sympathetic output and go more towards a parasympathetic tone and decrease, again, your heart rate, blood pressure, and actually get control of things. If you have ever been in a situation, an emergency situation, you'll most likely agree that if you can remain calm and work the problem and solve the problem, things work out much better than if you become very agitated and excited and start to make decisions without, necessarily thinking them through quickly or effectively. It's the same way. Controlling the breath controls the heart rate, controls the autonomic nervous system to actually slow things down. There's a couple actually very well documented models of how this works, but one is termed a neurovisceral integration model, which basically talks about the connection of our thinking brain and our heart through the autonomic nervous system in the vagal tone. So the higher the vagal tone or the parasympathetic tone, the better that our heart performs, the better that we think, and you have better emotional regulation abilities. There's also a polyvagal theory. The higher the vagal tone, the better people function socially. Again, not overreacting to things. Everything is slowed down, more clarity of thought. And then there's a biological behavioral model where the vagus nerve plays a role in energy regulation. So again, slowing things down, metabolism is improved, glucose is used more sparingly, we use more of our fat stores, heart rate slows down, and this is very interesting that they've been able to show that if you're breathing slower and more effectively, you're actually burning more fat stores, and again, your metabolism is more effective. And the higher your vagal tone is at baseline, by doing all this, you really have a lot of energy reserve capacity, so you have that glucose available when you really need it. So if someone was going to sprint or run really fast, then they have these glucose stores available. You have another gear. So it's all in kind of developing these multiple gears with having the higher vagal tone. This all relates to this heart rate variability. And when we talk about heart rate variability, we're talking about the time between each beat of our heart measured through an electrocardiogram or your actual electrical depolarization of the heart. And there's various ways to measure heart rate variability, and I'm not going to go into it during this podcast, but there are apps, and it's best measured with a specific chest strap that's able to pair with one of these apps. You can actually have it done in a doctor's office with high frequency EKGs as well. But there's a lot of home ways. I'm actually using a Wahoo chest strap and an app to look at heart rate variability, and all this is tied in. The more vagal tone, the more parasympathetic tone, the more heart rate variability that you have. And you would think, well, why do I want my heart rate to be irregular? It's not. It's actually, again, associated with higher parasympathetic tone and an improved cardiovascular outcome. Over 15 years ago, as a cardiologist, when people had a heart attack and was followed by EKGs or monitors, those people with a less variation in their heart rate were at higher risk for a complication and subsequent heart attacks, and the question is whether to treat those people medically to protect them from possible arrhythmias that they might have because of this electrical instability. But again, now we're looking at more and more ways to actually regulate this with breathing patterns And of course, other parameters also help in heart rate variability. We also know that people that are overweight tend to have lower heart rate variabilities. People that are poorly conditioned have lower heart rate variabilities. But these can all be improved by, plant-based nutrition and exercise and breath training. It has even been shown that, first of all, breathing through the nose is of utmost importance, because when you breathe through your nose, you increase nitric oxide production, you increase vagal tone. Think about the opposite. If you're running away and you're very scared and you're breathing through your mouth and you're huffing and puffing, that is going to increase your sympathetic tone. So the first thing is to start by being conscious of breathing through your nose all the time, even when you're exercising. And then there's some, if you can slow your exercise rate down, that you can exercise and breathe through your nose, that's going to train you to be able to do that at higher and higher workloads. But at first, make sure you're doing it at rest. Make sure you're breathing through your nose during sleep. Make sure you're taking effective breaths through the diaphragm. And you can even increase heart rate variability by breathing in through one nostril and out through the other, because inspiration is going to be more of a sympathetic driven, parasympathetic more expiratory. And so by doing an increase one nostril at a time, just at rest, you can actually slow things down, increase parasympathetic tone, increase your heart rate variability. By prolonging your expiration, you can, again, increase vagal tone. When you do breath holds and you're contracting the diaphragm, you're also starting to simulate more parasympathetic response to that exercise as well. There was a study looking at heart rate variability affected by whether your body mass index or body fat, percent body fat measured by MRI versus waist-hip ratio, and they found that waist-hip, the ratio, and body fat were more predictive of heart rate variability. There was a Korean study done by that. And basically, visceral fat or abdominal fat is associated with autonomic nervous system imbalances. Again, more sympathetic tone than parasympathetic tone. So by changing your diet, becoming plant-based, losing weight, exercise, are great ways to improve your heart rate variability based on just that. Of course, people also have shown, getting a gastric bypass and taking diet pills with the weight loss is also, our appetite suppressants. Not all of weight loss pills are created equal, obviously. But, the ones that have an appetite suppressant have shown that you can improve heart rate variability that way as well. But obviously, it'd be much safer to lose weight through a plant-based diet. We're always kind of looking for the easy button. I was driving home today and I saw a billboard for cannabis to get, to be able to get medical marijuana. And it was, an advertisement strongly suggesting that, people, get their card now. And of course, it's a for-profit business at this point, just like pharmaceutical industry, but people see it differently because it's a plant, because it's not, because it's not an FDA regulated medication. It's been, cannabis has been touted as being the cure for just about everything. But again, it is a medicinal plant that has side effects just like any other medicinal plant or chemically, any other chemical derived. And, to think that it cures everything is not accurate. I am in no way a cannabis expert. I'm sure that there are some medical benefits, but not without significant side effects. And to suggest that this is the cure-all for everything that ails us is really bothersome to me. There was a recent study that came out, increased infertility, decreased cognitive scores in children that mom smoked marijuana in utero as they started to go to school. Of course, there's associated decreased mental acuity, mentation, decreased decision-making, decreased alertness, which is a big price to pay for some of the some of the touted benefits. And if we go back to breathing as far as a way to handle stress and to increase parasympathetic tone and to increase healing and decrease inflammation, as well as pain control, it's certainly a much better way without significant side effects. And I think, that's where you have to look at a lot of medications, and, we compare, are there, the benefits of eating plant-based and the benefits of breath work. And certainly there's a whole spectrum of benefits, and the more you do, the better it gets. But on the other hand, the side effects are nil. We don't have to worry about the terrible side effects of eating plant-based. Certainly by improving your breathing and your parasympathetic tone, there's no bad side effects. There's no hangover. There's no decreased mental acuity. It certainly helps with pain control. So I think when you look, a lot of people look at supplements like, well, as long as the doctor doesn't prescribe them, then they must be good. As long as I can control them and get them when I want, or take what I want and do my own research, then they must be good. A lot of the supplements are associated with, backed by scientific evidence. And, it's really not scientific evidence. If you actually look at the reference, they may not even be anything related to the product. But, we seem to take those for their word much better than, some pharmaceutical studies. I'm certainly not saying there's not biased in medication, FDA-approved medications either. But I think that you have to take them with the same degree of caution. And if there's a way to do and get these benefits through how we eat and how we breathe and how we exercise, it's certainly a much safer way. And I'll even look at the side effects of food. I had a person with diabetes and heart failure go to a local restaurant to meet somebody for a dinner, and there weren't any good plant-based options available. So he had a prime rib sandwich and French fries, and he went into heart failure. So that is a terrible side effect of nutrition. Red meat, salt, oils, there's all significant side effects to that single dose of that medication. People think that, that they're not, one meal won't hurt, but in this case, it put him into heart failure. Rotisserie chickens have been, I have seen time and time again, those put my patients into heart failure because the chickens are typically soaked in a salt brine before they're put in all these different salty spices and oils and put on that rotisserie grill, and they can actually cause heart failure. Yesterday, how many people had hot dogs yesterday, 4th of July, it's the great American food. How many people had elevated blood pressures and glucoses last night as a result of the indulgence of the 4th of July picnics? I had people say they didn't exercise yesterday. I was, my friends over-exercise, if you want to say. They really didn't over-exercise, but they, ran a 5K, and then there was a swim across the harbor where they swam, about a mile and a half as part of their exercise before, the picnic. So, it's are these choices that actually have side effects right away. It's not just one meal that causes a side effect. I had another person ask me about, when can I have popcorn? She's a diabetic, and just air pop popcorn, because we think that that's very benign. But anybody that's ever eaten popcorn, you just don't eat one kernel. You sit there and eat it and eat it and eat it. And the serving size is, never regulated, and people overeat. And what does it actually do for people? It maybe gives you a little bit of fiber, but that would be about it. There's no real nutritional value. There's no antioxidants or B vitamins or anti-inflammatory. It's just a junk food. It's no different than potato chips for the most part. So it's, I can't ever say that it's going to be good to eat popcorn or indulge in those things, because it's never going to help you be healthy, and never going to improve diabetes control. So what all these things mean that we talked about today, heart rate variability and breathing and sympathetic tone and parasympathetic tone and lean body mass and abdominal obesity, how are they all tied together, and how can we address them? Well, the bottom line is plant-based nutrition and goes a long way to address all these different things. It'll help you improve your glucose control, achieve a lean body weight, that improves your heart rate variability, improves your cardiovascular risk. It reverses peripheral vascular disease. There was another study that showed that there can be significant complications of peripheral vascular angioplasty and stent placement. If someone has a bleeding complication, it can increase the mortality significantly. But this can all be reversed with plant-based nutrition, less stress on the heart. Again, adding the breath work to all this increases the sympathetic tone. It'll improve, exercise helps to improve cardiovascular fitness. Breathing correctly during exercise gives you that much bigger bang for your buck. It increases the gear range that you have between your parasympathetic and sympathetic tone, so that you can use your energy effectively, burn fat stores most of the time, and use your glucose only when needed, when you're really bumping up your activity and it's the end of your marathon or the end of your 5K, as opposed to burning all your matches in the beginning. So I think it's all really good news that we don't have to rely on a lot of these medications and procedures and supplements and different plant extracts to achieve control of our autonomic nervous system, to achieve control of our pain, and to achieve optimal health and wellness. So I hope you take some of this into consideration when you're making your choices over the long weekend and in the future, and in your exercise regimen. I'm going to be incorporating more of the heart rate variability training and breath work into my training practices, and I'll let you know how that's going as I go. I've already seen improvement during my runs, and my heart rate and my glucose utilization when I exercise. I'm going to be doing a lot of measurements of heart rate variability, and I'll report back in on how that's changing over time. Please check out my website, drdulaney.com. You can sign up for our newsletter. There's a weekly blog I'll be that I post, as well as Addie Dulaney Meinert, my registered dietitian, puts up a post every week. Please check out the site where on the website we have a link to purchase the cookbook, Plant-Based Wellness, 3 Generations of Cooking, the Doctor, the Dietitian, and the Diva. If you'd like to get an autographed copy, send me an email at jami@drdulaney.com, and we can get you an autographed copy, both from any one of us. I'd like to meet you. I'll be doing a book signing up in Venice July 26th, and then in Punta Gorda at the end of August. If you, again, the books are available on Amazon as well. If you buy a book, you can get an ebook at $2.99. It's a pretty good deal. If you're a Barnes & Noble shopper or a Books A Million shopper, you can ask for them to order it because it's now available on Ingram Sparks. You can also get your local library to get a copy if you'd like. If you have any questions, give me an email at jami@drdulaney.com. I'd like to hear from you. And until next time, breathe light, breathe effectively, slow your expiration down, and eat plant-based.